Hello, it's Tim. This is book 2 for June. See if I can get a little more light. Okay. Um, we're reading from We Were 8 Years in Power, excuse me, and specifically from The Case for Reparations. Let's get into it. The Quiet Plunder. The consequences of 250 years of enslavement, of war upon black families and black people, were profound. Like home ownership today, slave ownership was aspirational, attracting not just those who owned slaves, but those who wished to. Much as homeowners today might discuss the addition of a patio or the painting of a living room, slaveholders traded tips on the best methods for breeding workers, exacting labor, and doling out punishment. Just as a homeowner today might subscribe to a magazine like This Old House, slave owners had journals such as DeBoe's Review, which recommended the best practices for wringing profits from slaves. By the dawn of the Civil War, the enslavement of black America was thought to be so foundational to the country that those who sought to end it were branded heretics, worthy of death. Imagine what would happen if a president today came out in favor of taking all American homes from their owners. The reaction might well be violent. This country was formed for the white, not for the black man, John Wilkes Booth wrote before killing Abraham Lincoln, and looking upon African slavery from the same standpoint held by those noble framers of our Constitution. I, for one, have never considered it one of the greatest blessings, both for themselves and us, that God ever bestowed upon a favored nation. In the aftermath of the Civil War, radical Republicans attempted to reconstruct the country upon something resembling universal equality, but they were beaten back by a campaign of redemption led by white liners, red shirts, and Klansmen, built bent on upholding a society formed for the white, not for the black man. A wave of terrorism roiled the South. In massive history reconstruction, Eric Foner recounts incidents of black people being attacked for not removing their hats, for refusing to hand over a whiskey flask, for disobeying church procedures, for using insular language, for disputing labor contracts, for refusing to be tied like a slave. Sometimes the attacks were intended simply to thin out the niggers a little. Terrorism carried the day, and federal troops withdrew from the South in 1877. The dream of Reconstruction died. For the next century, political violence was visited upon blacks wantonly, with special treatment meted out toward black people of ambition. Black schools and churches were burned to the ground. Black voters and the political candidates who attempted to rally them were intimidated, and some were murdered. At the end of World War I, black veterans returning to their homes were assaulted for daring to wear the American uniform. The demobilization of soldiers after the war, which put white and black veterans into competition for scarce jobs, produced the Red Summer of 1919, a succession of racist pogroms against dozens of cities ranging from Longview, Texas, to Chicago to Washington, D.C. Organized white violence against blacks continued into the 1920s. In 1921, a white mob leveled Tulsa's Black Wall Street, and in 1923, another one razed the black town of Rosewood, Florida, and virtually no one was punished. The work of mobs was a rabid and violent rendition of prejudices that extended even into the upper reaches of American government. The New Deal is today remembered as a model for what progressive government should do: cast a broad social safety net that protects the poor and afflicted while building the middle class. When progressives wish to express their disappointment with Barack Obama, they point to the accomplishments of Franklin Roosevelt. But these progressives rarely note that Roosevelt's New Deal, much like the democracy that produced it, rested on the foundation of Jim Crow. The Jim Crow South, writes Ira Katznelson, a history and political science professor at Columbia, was the one collaborator America's democracy could not do without. The marks of the collaboration are all over the New Deal. The omnibus programs passed under the Social Security Act of 1935 were crafted in such a way as to protect the Southern way of life. Old age insurance, Social Security proper, and unemployment insurance excluded farm workers and domestics, jobs heavily occupied by blacks. When President Roosevelt signed Social Security into law in 1935, 65% of the African Americans nationally, and between 70 and 80% in the South were ineligible. The NAACP protested, calling the new American safety net a sieve with holes just big enough for the majority of Negroes to fall through. And there you see, the brutality continues and continues and continues. So when you see black people really yelling and really showing emotions during the protest and really screaming, that's generation after generation after generation of pain and suffering. And you're talking post-slavery. We're not even going to go back to slavery, but just post-slavery. Just the 20th century alone, it just never ends. So be patient with them. Be patient with us, because we're all angry. And we are justified in our anger. Until next time, I want to thank you for supporting me, and I want to say, take care of your mind, take care of your body, and please be safe.